Well, hello, everybody. My name is Colin Falwell. I'm the field CTO here at Sumo Logic for all things observability, and I am pleasantly happy to share with you today. And our topic on DevSecOps, and I got my counterpart here on the security side. Chaz, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everybody. So I'm also a field CTO focused on security here at Sumo Logic. So good to meet all of you today.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, hey, look, DevSecOps, Chaz, is like a term that's really been growing in the field as of late. I've been doing a lot of research lately around elite performers in DevSecOps, which is this idea of really being able to accelerate your time to change, lowering your change failure rate, being able to get code into production much faster using techniques like observability driven development. And I'm just curious, like, what do you see kind of happening, broadly speaking, in the industry around this idea of DevSecOps, and what do you see transforming?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's funny because as we were kind of preparing for this call, I thought this little webinar is a perfect microcosm of what's happening at large. I've got 20 plus years of security experience. Most of that's, starting early career doing the on-prem pen testing, red teaming, and then your background, which is deep into observability and development. And now look at us. We're sitting here at the same table trying to figure out how we meld these minds together, which I think is happening across the industry, right? That idea of shift left security, which is really take all of the things that we've learned over the years from the security, incident response and how to protect things and how to respond to things effectively, and actually embed that into the development life cycle.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of powerful lessons that can be learned from doing that. And there's also, of course, ways to do it incorrectly, which brings headache and heartache. But yeah, I think it's a conversation that everybody should be having. Really, is how do we blend our knowledge base across the silos and build that bridge? And a lot of it really comes down to kind of the merging of two different families of best practices, right? The
Hmm.
CI/CD pipeline has matured, and as you described, elite teams now are pushing out code faster than ever. And then on the security, incident response, and detection side of things, they've dialed in nicely cloud posture, attack surface management, vulnerability, all of those kind of tool stacks. Now, how do we bring those together and really make it a seamless experience is the challenge that we're dealing with.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and this is this idea of getting into this maturity and this life cycle of in having posture management. And one of the things that I've been seeing in the realm of DevOps and observability, and as observability has become more, let's say, open to the industry. It's not exclusive. It's not a vendor play anymore. You got things like open telemetry. You've got motions like GitOps and really just infrastructure as code. Now you've got observability as code. And I really see, I think, my take on this is that modern observability practice and principles really is becoming the foundation, not just for DevOps, but really XOps, and that includes SecOps, and includes FinOps and other things. But this idea of being able to curate telemetry and be able to provide the basis of intelligence back into the feedback loop, if you will, into the organization at all levels of the software development lifecycle. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so, and it's really a matter of, the days of yore, right? Was you would develop an application, maybe a critical app or a supporting business app, and then it would get tossed over the wall to the security team to
Hmm.
say, hey, can you make sure this is hardened and can you monitor it for any anomalous behavior or attacks? But like you described, now it's more about instrumenting that telemetry at the outset, even as far back as the whiteboard design process, so
Hmm.
that as it moves through the development, we already have those hooks that are needed, and we've already got that strategy and those use cases built out. So if things go awry, that security team, or maybe In fact, what's really interesting is now all of a sudden we see what's called like a distributed SOC, where you don't have a team of security focused individuals, but really you're moving that upstream. And so the developers are almost dual hatting, or the system owners or stakeholders are actually doing that first line security triage, which is great because they know the application better than anyone else.
Hmm.
They've designed and instrumented it in a way that they can detect those outliers.
Hmm.
um, and
That's
so you're
interesting.
not relying on kind of green analysts that don't understand what they're looking at, but rather the system owners themselves. And hopefully the alert fatigue problem doesn't bleed into their day job, and it starts to affect the code cadence, right? Which is one of the things you talk about frequently, is still maintaining that elite performing status, but not letting security get in your way, which is often, it's definitely a balancing act that can be dangerous.
Yeah, when you have a lead time for change of less than a day, and you're deploying, multiple times per day, your change failure rate having that lower than 15%, like being able to escalate or innovate at that speed, being able to move that quickly, being able to go from code commit to running in production in 24 hours is a heady challenge for a lot of organizations. But the number of organizations that can achieve that are growing, and I think a big part of that comes down to just the value and the diversity in what you have in terms of open source tooling now. I wanted to spend a few minutes on that, like from the kind of, I think, traditional DevOps perspective, like open telemetry really is the kind of emerging de facto standard, if you will, for telemetry, for all things observability. What do you see on the security side, around tooling, and how is that tooling kind of helping this process from whiteboard to or exploration into kind of that development phase?
Yeah, it's so interesting to watch things develop. It used to be, in fact, we just recently released a blog article on this that we jointly worked on. But it used to be, the vendor would show up in black suits and black ties and present black box solutions, and you were really beholden to them. And whether that's your codes, your static, whatever tool it is that you're concerned with, but you're really kind of locked into the vendor. Now it's so much different because the developers themselves are working on all of these open source security projects on the side. And when you would wander the floors of the RSA security conference, and there's more vendors that you could ever keep track of, all of those had a voice and they have marketing dollars. Well, now in the open source community, it's more of, hey, what are my peers using, what are my peers actually developing, how have they solved these unique challenges? And a lot of the time there's no charge for them, you just have to know that the tool exists, right? So
Hmm.
the tool
Hmm.
sprawl is a little bit different. You're not getting bombarded with well, you're still getting bombarded with the sales calls and the vendor pitches. However, oftentimes you have elsewhere to look, right? You can look to the open source community, um, things like Trivy and SemGrep and Calico and Cloud
Hmm.
Query, and all of these very exciting projects that everybody should be tracking,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
that are being built by the developers and the application owners, which is really cool because they already have a very vested interest, right? And a lot of times they're just trying to make their day job easier. And so the open source community, I think, is the future. It'll be very interesting to see, as the capabilities and the features get reach parity with the more expensive solutions, to see kind of how that all plays out.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point, and that is like, what is the motivation behind open source, and why is it so prevalent and pervasive today? I think we've kind of reached a point where probably 100% of organizations are, deploying, leveraging open source in one or many ways, right? And so, I think if you look at observability and kind of the history of open census and open tracing into open telemetry, like all of this was born out of a need for interoperability, non-exclusivity. In order to be able to embrace automation, being able to do things in kind of a tool chain automated way within CI/CD pipelines. proprietary solutions out there just weren't compatible, and you couldn't own what you were putting into your code base to do these sorts of things. And I think I see the same thing on the security side with security tools, and that a good portion of these tools, like you said, are born out of the need for developers just to be able to improve their daily lives in terms of what they need to do in regard to security as well.
Yeah, and it's no knock on the vendors either, but it's very difficult for them to move, at the speed of innovation that the rest
Mhm,
of the world is, as we're going through that quote unquote digital transformation and
mhm,
shifting everything into cloud workloads. They've got a lot of tech debt, right? And so all of these tools that are are really built to handle more legacy security problems. Um, they can't just pull up stakes and walk away and start over. Whereas, it could be just a very small open source security project that really takes hold and solves very, very
mhm.
needed pain points.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch for sure.
Great. Let's shift gears a little bit and just talk about like the phases of going through SDLC and kind of I'll kind of cover what I see in terms of the observability kind of DevOps lens. Maybe you can kind of cover a little bit on the SecOps side, but like what are some of the important things in as we get into like development flow and operations, like the exploration phase? I can tell you from an observability perspective, like if you're dealing with things like reliability management, being prescriptive and explicit about what metrics you measure, what are the upper and lower bounds on those metrics, so that you can have kind of performance corridors and be able to. That's kind of the basis for SLIs and SLOs and those sorts of things. Um, what do you see on the security side that's really important to like take up front in the exploration phase if you're a developer and you're designing for security observability?
Well, I mean, the big topics of the year or last couple of years still are, you know, understanding the inventory and the SBOM,
Mhm,
and that supply chain side of things. So,
mhm,
we're more and more reliant on code that was developed maybe somewhere in a faraway place in a
mhm,
basement. And there's an inherent trust there as we bring all this code and we try and solve problems in a highly efficient way
mhm,
through modularizing that and using these different building blocks.
mhm,
So at the outset, as you're really working on your application infrastructure, understanding what components are being used, what libraries and dependencies, tracking that in some way so that downstream you can run metrics against it. And you know heaven forbid there's another global vulnerability released. um, Everybody doesn't have to stop what they're doing. You simply check the SBOM or check your tooling to say, okay, where was this dependency or library used?
mhm,
Make those modifications needed, right? So
mhm,
planning ahead to have that consistent dynamic inventory, I think is
mhm.
one critical thing. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
No, I think it really does, and you bring up that great point on this the S bomb, and I think one of the things that really is important around that, and I see this is where I think one of that merger of DevSecOps has a lot to benefit from one another, because on the observability side, we're always trying to take production issues and relate those back to like a build manifest. I mean, if we can get back to the developer that introduced, a regression in production, and that regression in production is expressed in a metric that is deviating or drifting, being able to, do the analytics. So, paying attention up front to log format, verbosity, all of that kind of comes around that open source tooling decisions. But you bring up this great point, because on the security side, you have this, kind of de facto artifact called the security or the software bill of materials. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to the SBOM and being able to run analytics between production and SBOM as well. So that's interesting to me in many ways. Let's talk coding in terms of coding, if you're in the process of developing software, what do you see developers that are taking on more of a security hat doing in the coding lifecycle today?
So, I mean, now we're, I guess, 2023. Everybody should be shouting, everything is code, right?
Hmm.
Um, and when you're talking as infrastructure as code, all the way to the other extreme, detection
Hmm.
as code.
Hmm.
If it's not described as code and it doesn't have some sort of life cycle built around it, you probably need to retool a little bit.
Hmm.
The detection as code is interesting because um, it's newer for the security side, right? For those that I work with intimately, they're still using web UIs or a lot of manual configuration as they develop their correlation and detection rules, or running their analytics.
Hmm.
But most of the tools now, everything can be expressed as code, and you can actually wrap some procedures and processes around that to figure out, all right, let's, as we write new correlations, let's move it into the pipeline, and take advantage of everything that the development side has been doing from the beginning, right?
Hmm.
So that when things don't go as according to plan, or maybe you're just doing your change management and tracking and metrics, your detection, life cycle is just as good as the development life cycle. So it's
Hmm.
interesting to see that kind of viral adoption of everything as code.
Yeah, I think I see that also. I see a lot of security, like in the DevOps. I talk to a lot of teams that are doing, uh, they're building the pipelines. A lot of the old SRE teams have evolved into kind of the cloud teams that build the pipelines and kind of overlay the blueprints for how things get done. And I see a lot of focus and effort on like securing the SBOM, securing open source tooling, going down so far as to have like author verification on commits, code signing, those sorts of things. I see organizations forking public projects and maintaining those forks to upstream, but now maintaining the security over it that way, right? Through forking and those sorts of strategies. I think all of that kind of comes back down to reliability management. Do you see much, in terms of measuring, those capabilities as kind of quality gates or quality metrics? Do you see those starting to take place? Do you see any SLI or SLO happening on the security side?
I honestly, I haven't seen it adopted yet.
Hmm.
When you talk SLIs and SLOs, you'll still get that kind of glazed look, like, what are you talking about? Um, but I think it's around. I think it's right around the corner,
Yeah.
because it's really all about the metrics and that continuous improvement,
Hmm.
and you've got to have ways to track it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think all the things that we talked about today, like, are discrete capabilities in an organization, and your ability to continuously improve those capabilities obviously comes down to being able to measure, and so you've got to have some metric that describes how well you're doing on those things.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of software build and testing, I guess when it comes down to really getting code into and through the testing process, I see a lot more tools in the pipeline now, and a lot more telemetry around the security side, the SaaS testing and those sorts of things. Anything new and exciting that you think are worth highlighting?
Um, no, I mean, on the pre-production and post-production side,
Hmm.
there's too many very cool bleeding edge tools to probably list out here. Um, but yeah, I mean, take a look at it from both vantage points, right?
Hmm.
Make sure you're doing that scanning before things go live, and then trust but verify, right? Like, assume the
Hmm.
worst, and once the code is live, make sure that you're doing that post, vulnerability, and having those, like you said, the instrumentation really to detect outliers. The last thing that you want to be is, feeding some crypto miner workload, inadvertently, because you didn't realize that this function, or whatever was open, right? And it happens, right? It definitely happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I think just all of this, and we're running out of time, so we'll wrap up here. But I think I want to stress to everybody, like, the most important thing is logging at the end of the day. Having audit trail, having logs of the events and the things that are taking place from CI/CD through the testing, through the end-to-end testing, any automation, like the digital exhaust that's admitted, being able to capture that and to build on that data, really kind of top line visibility and into key metrics and things that you want to be able to measure and track in terms of the life cycle. The faster you can iterate through those life cycles and improve those metrics, the better you're going to be at achieving elite performing status. Um, and that's super key. Anything you want to cover in terms of closing thoughts?
No, I think that sums it up.
Fantastic. Well, take care, everybody. Thanks for visiting with us today. And Chaz, thanks for spending this time with me.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.